Alright, so protests have been erupting across my home city of Atlanta, Georgia, in the aftermath of a police raid that ended in the killing of one of the forest defenders who has been trying to protest against the construction of a $90 million police facility that is being called Cop City. And we're going to get into some of the details in terms of what actually went down with that shooting and whether or not the police narrative is accurate. But first, I just want to give you guys a little bit more of a background. I know that I've covered Cop City before on this channel, but here's just a basic couple-minute rundown in terms of what Cop City is and how completely absurd this project from the outset has been, even as a vast majority of Atlanta residents have been opposing it, and it has been shoved through by the police unions, by corrupt city council politicians, and by our right-wing freak governor, Brian Kemp. So let's just go ahead and jump into this short video here.
Atlanta is planning on building a $90 million training ground in the forest to practice urban warfare tactics. Activists are calling it Cop City and say it will harm Black people in the environment.
The facility would be a space where the police could practice tear gas explosions, bomb testing, have a shooting range, practice high-speed chases. Like, they're literally going to build a mock city of Atlanta to practice different urban warfare tactics. The purpose of this project is to be able to better surveil, better suppress, and better prevent liberation movements that directly address the exploitation that Black and working class communities are feeling.
Atlanta actually increased its police budget after Black Lives Matter protests and a movement to defund the police. More than 70% of Atlantans disapprove of Cop City. In 2021, Atlanta's population was almost 50% Black. 20% of Atlantans live in poverty.
The Atlanta police have always been antagonistic towards poor and working class people. They have been active agents of gentrification.
Cop City is proposed to be built on land that included a slave plantation and a prison farm. The construction would cut down part of the South River forest, which helps prevent flooding and protects against extreme heat. Activists against Cop City are occupying the forest, building barricades, and protesting against corporate sponsors to stop construction.
Defund the police, abolish them, and invest in the things that actually keep us safe. We've been ramping up our efforts to get folks in the community trained on things like restorative justice, on medic trainings, on de-escalation tactics, disaster relief, all the things that we know actually keep us safe when we're in crisis. And so we don't need to call the police. Folks won't feel like they need to engage 911, that will have those skills in our community and can meet our own needs.
Okay, so base take from this person right here giving a breakdown in terms of where our money could possibly be better spent instead of dumping, again, $90 million fucking dollars into a giant cop city, a literal mock city of Atlanta, so that they can, go around and practice tear gassing innocent protesters and, doing high-speed chases where they're inevitably going to end up killing innocent bystanders. I mean, just a completely absurd project from the outset. And again, it's very important to understand that a vast majority, upwards of over 70% on the limited data that we have of the Atlanta residents, are opposed to this project, and yet they managed to get it through. How do they manage to get it through? Well, you have gigantic corporate backers of this, all of the major corporations that are based out of Atlanta, like I think it was like UPS and Home Depot, I think Chick-fil-A threw their name in there, Waffle House, including my university that I went to, Georgia State University, is also backing the project. All of these different corporate entities that are dumping millions and millions of dollars into this project to make sure that it gets done, dumping, untold amounts of money into the campaign coffers of some of these state and city level politicians so that they will continue backing it. And as well, you also have obviously the influence of the police unions and the police foundation here in Atlanta that also have massive sway over our city council as well. So, I mean, it's just a gigantic combination, a perfect insight, a perfect, general outline in terms of the fights that we are engaging with, not just in Atlanta, but across the entire country, with the power and influence of corporations and the police on some of our state and local politics. Okay, so, I mean, again, there's some very important details that they laid out within that process, or within that video they just put out, to give you an idea in terms of how completely absurd this project was from the jump. I mean, basically, nobody wanted this to end up happening, and so you have had some pushback, some major protests that have taken place. And again, you had these forest defenders who are basically camped out within the forest in order to try to protect it, right? And I mean, again, as I pointed out in that video, how fucking insane is it? It's like perfectly on the nose that they're deciding to build this not only in a way that it's going to destroy local environment, have negative impacts, you know, climate-wise in terms of getting rid of a safeguard for heat and flooding and all of these things, just so happens to be right next to a vastly disproportionately black community in Atlanta. But I mean, they pointed out in that video that people have been taking to these forests and basically setting up some of these encampments, engaging in mutual aid, engaging in direct action, trying to push back against this building process to try to protest it, right? And I think they are 100% justified in doing that, even though some people may have critiques of the way that they have gone about doing this. I mean, at some point, somebody has to stand up and fight back against this incredibly corrupt and wildly unnecessary facility that they're trying to put forward here. And again, I mean, it's like, it's one thing if you say, okay, well, it went through the democratic process, the people approve of it, and so it needs to be done. If that was the case, then okay, that's a different story. But they basically just completely ignored the actual feedback and input from the residents who live in this community, from the broader residents in Atlanta who are overwhelmingly opposed to this project. So at that point in my head, it's like, well, you've completely eviscerated any ability for Atlanta residents to actually push back through the democratic process. So how exactly do you expect them to fight back in this instance? I mean, they just expect people to roll over and accept this. And I mean, keep in mind, the Atlanta police were never really defunded, even during the height of the 2020 BLM protests. If anything, they got bumps to their police budgets, right? And if anything, they've gotten bumps to the military equipment, the hardware, the weapons that they are getting on a regular basis, okay? So they're not stripped of funding. It's not as if they need this brand new sparkly facility in order to do their fucking jobs. And if anything, I mean, I lived in Atlanta for my entire life. I know what the police do in Atlanta, and it's essentially nothing productive in any way, shape, or form. So the idea that this was a necessary project is completely insane. But now we're going to get to some more details in terms of the killing of this protester who was out there in the forest, because the police have just decided to escalate this to an entirely different level. And there's a lot of pushback to what the official police narrative has been surrounding the death of one of these protesters. So here from the Rolling Stone, they say cops say that slain Atlanta forest protester shot first. Activists aren't so sure. And you're going to see why they aren't so sure, because the cops have provided essentially zero actual evidence in order to back up the claims that they are making. So here from the Rolling Stone, they say on Wednesday morning, law enforcement officers in Georgia shot and killed a protester in a densely wooded area of Atlanta's South River Forest, which has been the site of ongoing protests against the development of a $90 million police training center dubbed Cop City for well over a year. The protests in Atlanta have been tense for months. They began in November of 2021 when activists set up camp in what they refer to as the Weelaunee Forest, where the city council had recently approved the construction of the 85-acre facility. I mean, this thing is goddamn gigantic. They say when I visited in late July of last year while reporting for the Rolling Stone, the activists had set up a flourishing semi-autonomous community under the banner of Defend the Atlanta Forest, or DAF, and the forest camp had common infrastructure like kitchens, latrines, and public spaces, and often hosted live music festivals, teach-ins on indigenous history, and tours for school groups and families. So 100% based there. They say the activists also regularly faced off with law enforcement and construction workers, often working in conjunction to force out the DAF. And in December, law enforcement's attempt to clear the protest movement from the forest intensified. In one raid, 6 protesters were arrested and charged with domestic terrorism, which I talked about in my previous video talking about Cop City, charged with domestic terrorism. Okay, and I'm going to show you a clip here in a second of one of the top police people, one of the top police officers within Atlanta, and his take on how he would define what a domestic terrorist is. It's completely absurd. But so 6 people initially get charged with domestic terrorism. I mean, a complete brazen scare tactic here, and obviously unjustified for, I mean, what exactly? Domestic terrorism for setting up an encampment in a public forest, which was previously supposed to be designated by the previous mayor as, you know, protected land, as public forestry. But apparently that makes you a domestic terrorist if you were doing that. But They say activists say that Wednesday's raid was similar, a large-scale sweep of the forest involving SWAT teams and several agencies, and the violence started almost immediately. And these motherfuckers were coming in here, guns blazing. This is what they looked like. Okay, here from Steven Donziger, there's been this a photo that has been basically circling around about what these guys look like. I mean, look at them. They look like actual, like, military personnel, right? They look like they're fucking soldiers ready to go to war, and they're going up against, like, some people who have camped out in a goddamn forest to try to protest the building of Cop City. And important to focus in here on what is circled in red in this photo, which is body cameras on these police officers, which is going to be important when we circle back around to some of the claims by these police officers, right? So they were wearing body cam footage, at least according to some of the pictures that we had of the people who were there on the ground at the time. But they continue saying that Michael Register, the director of the Georgia Bureau of Investigation, told reporters on Wednesday that a protester had been killed by police around 9 a.m. during an exchange of gunfire that began when a Georgia state trooper was shot without warning, and a GBI press release states that during an operation to identify people who are trespassing and committing other crimes on the property, law enforcement officers were fired upon as they approached an individual in a tent who was not complying with verbal instructions. And the release claims that, quote, a handgun and shell casings were located at the scene. Photos of the scene released by GBI show a small hammock hanging between two trees underneath the tarp. Okay, so do we have any follow-up? Was this a gun that was registered to the person that you killed? Is there any actual evidence that they fired rounds during this altercation? What's the evidence here? Do you have body cam footage? Do you have any of that? No, of course they don't. So here from The Guardian, a little bit more information on the story that is being put forward here by the police. They say that officials say that Manuel shot first at the state trooper without warning, and an officer or officers returned fire, but they haven't produced any evidence for the claim. And the trooper was described as stable and in the hospital on Thursday, and the GBI, which operates under Republican Governor Brian Kemp's orders, has released scant information, and on Thursday night told The Guardian that no body cam footage of the shooting exists. Hang on a second. No body cam footage of the shooting exists. Interesting, because we have pictures of the police officers who were doing some of these raids, and it looks like they were wearing body cameras. So were they not activating their body cameras and violating the rules on that front? Or are you just lying about this and you do have body cam footage, but you know that it would conflict with your narrative that this person shot first at you guys and then you fired back at them in self-defense or something like that? Which, listen, at the end of the day, I think honestly is a completely absurd narrative. We've heard testimony from a lot of the people who knew this person who ended up getting killed, from their family members and all of that, and it looks like they're just not anybody who would just randomly open fire on a fucking SWAT team approaching them, kitted out like they're ready to go to war. Okay, so this idea that, like, you have people who have been camping out here in this forest, who have been doing all of those other things that we just read about, right? Live music festivals, tours for schools and families, and operating kitchens and communal spaces and all of that, that this person was just what? Sitting in their encampment in a tree, in a tree forest, and was carrying this handgun and decided, like, okay, this is going to be my final stand. I see 8, fucking SWAT team members coming up to me. Let me just unload on one of them, guaranteeing my own death. It just does not add up in any way, shape, or form, according to all of the information that we have. And it's added on to that, especially suspicious, not only because you should never believe the police narrative at face value, or unless they actually provide substantial evidence to justify believing their claims. But, I mean, on top of that, they're saying they don't have body cam footage, we don't have any actual hard evidence that they shot first. It's just not adding up in any way, shape, or form. But they continue saying that at least a half dozen other protesters who were there in the forest at the time have communicated to other activists that one single series of shots could be heard. They believe that the state trooper could have been shot by another officer or by his own firearm, which to me seems much more likely. That is something that happens all the time. Believe it or not, some of these highly trained, militarized looking police officers are not even fucking accurate with their shots. Some studies show, they're less than 50% accurate on actually hitting their targets. So would it surprise me if this police officer either shot himself accidentally or was shot by another trooper during their barrage of bullets that they shot at this forest defender? No, that wouldn't surprise me in any way, shape, or form. But They continue, finishing off here, saying, meanwhile, both Tehran and local activists are looking into legal action, and Manuel's mother told The Guardian, quote, "I will go to the U.S. to defend Manuel's memory. I'm convinced that he was assassinated in cold blood." And I really do genuinely hope that there is a follow-up independent, emphasis on the independent investigation into what actually went on here, because you cannot possibly trust the GBI or, you know, these local police officers in Atlanta or any other one of the, 12 different fucking agencies that are going after these forest defenders. You couldn't possibly trust them with an investigation into this, obviously, because there's a conflict of interest there, but you need an independent investigation and you need consequences if, it comes out that the police are indeed lying about this. Now, I could be completely proven wrong, and maybe this person did decide randomly to open fire on, a group of approaching fully kitted out SWAT members, but again, I highly doubt that that's actually what happened. They're fully, ready and willing to be proven wrong on that one, but for now, I'm going to be hesitant to, believe the police forces that are just some of the most rampant liars in the country. But they continue down here saying that DAF activists were instantly critical of the GBI's account, claiming that there was reason to believe that the officer was hit again by friendly fire, not shot by the protester, pointing to reports by other forest defenders who heard, again, one burst of gunshots, not consistent with an exchange of fire. And they say the Atlanta Solidarity Fund, a nonprofit organization that provides arrested activists with bail money, jail support, and access to legal representation, wrote in a statement that it was preparing a legal team to investigate and pursue a wrongful death suit. So again, complete solidarity with them. Hope that they actually end up, coming out on the right side of that. But they say that Georgia State Police has not released body camera footage or meaningful details, and we are concerned a police cover-up could be underway, said the Atlanta Solidarity Fund, and they could be right on that front. They say, "We know that the Georgia police regularly and consistently lie about the conditions under which they shoot and kill people, and the facts will frequently change to justify police action, no matter how murderous or egregious." 100% true on that front. And they say no matter what they do, police will always claim to be the actual victims. And they say the GBI arrested 7 protesters. Again, this is a different raid. So we already had the 6 protesters initially that were arrested and charged with domestic terrorism. Now we have the GBI arresting 7 protesters in the raid on Wednesday, all of whom are being charged with criminal trespassing and domestic terrorism. And when reached for a comment about the shooting, the GBI referred the Rolling Stone to its prior statement. And then on Thursday morning, the Atlanta Community Press Collective, a local group that covers autonomous movements, identified the killed protester as Manuel Tehran, who's age 26, and several sources confirmed that Tehran's identity to the Rolling Stone, noting that in the forest, Tehran used non-binary pronouns and went by the name Tortuguita, or Little Turtle, a nod to their Venezuelan and Black heritage. And the DAF obviously sometimes uses names that aren't their real names because they're trying to somewhat hide their identity from the police for obvious reasons, but they went basically by Tortuguita, and they say friends described Tehran as a loving comrade who was a big help in building ties between local Atlanta activists and full-time forest defenders who often rely on local networks for support. And Tehran also participated in tree sitting, spending long periods of time ensconced in 15 or more feet in the forest canopy, and helped out with the camp's kitchen. And they joined the protests in May of 2022 from Tallahassee, Florida, where friends say that they worked on low-income housing construction projects. So, I mean, again, does this seem like the type of person who would just be carrying a handgun and then just randomly, ensure their own death by firing on a group of fully kitted out SWAT members? I highly doubt it. But again, waiting to see if there's any fucking follow-up evidence here from the police at all. But we're going to circle back around here to some of the protest pictures from what Atlanta has been looking like over the last couple of days. But here, I just want you to hear it directly from the mouth of, I believe this is the police chief in Atlanta, if I'm not mistaken. Yeah, this motherfucker, Darren Schweierbaum, who is giving us an idea of what exactly the police consider to be, quote-unquote, domestic terrorism, okay? Look at him say this with a straight face.
It doesn't take a rocket scientist or an attorney to tell you that breaking windows and setting fires is not protest. That is terrorism. And that they will be charged accordingly, and they will find that this police department and the partnership is equally committed to stop that activity.
Okay, so according to this guy, breaking windows and setting fires is domestic terrorism. breaking windows. I mean, genuinely think about that. I mean, this is, you know, the expansion of the authority, the power of the police state here in the United States. I mean, this is fucking wild. This is similar to what we saw under the Trump administration during the 2020 BLM protests as well, where they were basically classifying anybody, even somebody who like spray painted graffiti on a government building. You know, Chad Wolf at the time, the head of the Department of Homeland Security, was trying to classify those people as domestic terrorists as well. So, I mean, listen, you look at the broad scope of this. I mean, this is completely fucking insane. I mean, it's wildly deranged. We're talking about breaking windows. Okay, we're talking about maybe setting a small fire or something like that. That's domestic terrorism. All right, that's where we're at right now in terms of the right to free speech, the right to protest, the right to assemble here in the United States. And just showing you a little bit more pictures from what some of the protests look like on the ground, because of course, you have had a bunch of conservatives, and I'll show you one of my tweets here in a second, bunch of different conservative pundits, politicians, etc., that have been coming out and saying, oh my God, the entire city of Atlanta is burning down right now. But I mean, basically, it looks like we had like, what, a burnt cop car. Okay, I'm going to be honest with you guys, you know, obviously I can't publicly endorse burning police cars, but it doesn't look like anybody got hurt, and I just don't give a fuck about that, genuinely. But so it looks like you had a single, I think, police car that was successfully burned by protesters, and then you had some broken windows here at what looks like a Wells Fargo again. Oh, I'm gonna sit here and like weep my fucking eyes out because a Wells Fargo got vandalized. Okay, so Wells Fargo, some broken windows there. It looks like broadly you had a bunch of peaceful protesters there, but again, I mean, the notion that we should be hyper focusing on, you know, maintaining this narrative surrounding every protest needs to be hyper peaceful and there can't be any broken windows or anything like that, I think is honestly completely ridiculous and isn't really how protests work out on the ground. But again, that's basically it. Okay, you got some broken windows. I think this one was from Wells Fargo. You had another one that was where the Atlanta Police Foundation is based out of, and then you had a taxpayer-funded police car that gets burned, okay? And so, of course, with that being the case, you have, you know, accounts like Libs of TikTok here, one of the most deranged, freakish, reactionary accounts on Twitter run by Chaya Raichik, and this is what she says is, you know, burning down the entire city of Atlanta. She literally says Antifa is burning down Atlanta right now, and this is what she shows here, okay? We got a couple fireworks and some broken windows. Whoa, crazy. Okay, so I mean that's literally it. It's you know, a couple fireworks go off and then some broken windows there, and that's what they refer to as the entire city of Atlanta being burnt to the ground apparently. And you see some rocks there on the ground. I guess some people were chucking some rocks, but you know, honestly, this reminds me of how Israel classifies Palestinian protesters and liberation fighters as well, because you know, we've seen recent statements, especially coming out of you know, the new government that just took power under Benjamin Netanyahu with absolute reactionary right-wing freaks like Itamar Ben-Gvir, and you know, they're coming out and saying that anybody who chucks a rock or something during a protest should also be considered a terrorist, and that you can do whatever the fuck you want to them to you know, crack down the whip. So I mean, listen, in the broader scope of things, I think that this story is going national for a reason. This is you know, obviously a little insight into where we currently are in the fight to defund the police, and not just for the sake of it, but to protect our communities, obviously disproportionately black and brown communities here in the United States from what is effectively an occupying force, especially if more facilities like Cop City are actually you know, allowed to be constructed here in the United States. I mean, they're effectively like police military encampments to an extent. So I mean, this is where we're at in this fight, you know, to defund the police, to actually reallocate those resources towards things that will make material improvements in people's lives. I mean, down in Atlanta, we have a massive homeless crisis, we have a housing crisis, we have a healthcare crisis, an education crisis. I mean, so many different issues where we could be putting money into actually investing in some of the poorest and most vulnerable people and communities within the city of Atlanta, but instead, we have to dump millions and millions, tens of millions of dollars into this completely useless project that is literally just going to be a, you know, a training ground for police to continue with their occupation force within the city of Atlanta. And again, I mean, this is a broader lesson here in terms of how we need to make adjustments in strategy moving forward with these types of things. Because, I mean, again, you look at the 2020 BLM protests, some of the largest civil rights protests in the history of the country, and what did we get out of it? I mean, we got increased police budgets, we have increased police killings. Last year was a record year for police killings in the United States, and we have the construction of completely absurd facilities like Cop City, where they're even willing to, you know, partner directly with corporations, with corrupted politicians, and even going so far as to kill protesters who are trying to stand up and defend their own communities. So listen, you know, I appreciate you guys watching videos like this and breakdowns, you know, detailed breakdowns on what is going on with pretty specific stories like this. But, you know, Atlanta obviously needs solidarity right now, but across the board, we need to honestly think a lot deeper in terms of how we are going to go about confronting the power and the authority and the violence that a lot of these police unions and police foundations have over our politics right now.
Everyone is saying good politic guy has the best politics. Believe me, no one does it like him. Believe me, everyone is saying